Welcome to this public defense today, and the dissertation of with Christopher Malefors, who will defend his thesis with the title "Food Waste Reduction in the Public Catering Sector." My name is Åke Nordberg. I'm associate professor at the Department of Energy and Technology here at the SLU and has been appointed by the faculty to chair this public defense. In order to fulfill the requirements of a public defense, there is also need for some important persons, and I will start with the opponent, which is then Slava Filimonau, coming from School of Hospitality and Tourism Management at Surrey University in UK. Then we have the evaluation committee. We have docent Ingela Marklinde from the Department of Food Studies, Nutrition and Dietetics from Uppsala University. And also joining online, we have Professor Katarina Belter from School of Health, Care and Social Welfare at Mälardalen University in Västerås, Sweden, and Dr. Tom Quested from the Waste and Resource Action Programme at Banbury in UK. And we also have reserve in the evaluation committee, which is Dr. Claudia von Brömsen, coming from the Department of Energy and Technology at SLU Uppsala. You are all very welcome. But I also would like to present the supervisor group, starting with the main supervisor, Associate Professor Mattias Eriksson, sitting here. And we also have the co-supervisors, Dr. Ingrid Strid, here, and also Professor Per-Anders Hansson. And before going through the procedure, I'm obliged then also to inform that this public defense will be recorded through the webinar, and we will utilize them for our dissemination activities and to archive this very special occasion. Good, then everybody is aware of that. Then we will come to the procedure. Christopher will start with a presentation, approximately 30 minutes. And after that, the word is given to the opponent, which will then come also forward here and to initiate a discussion on the topic, and then also to put the work into a more to the scientific context. After that, the word is given to the evaluation committee, which then can ask further questions or issues you like to discuss with Christopher. And finally, the floor is open for questions from the audience, both here in the room and those who you are participating in the webinar. And after that, the session will be closed. However, at approximately 2:30, 14:30, we will take a 10 minutes break so you can stretch your legs and refresh yourself. And then after 10 minutes, we will continue from where we stopped before for the break. Good. So before we start, then I would like to ask you, Christopher, do you have anything you like to comment or add in relation to your published thesis? No errata?
No errata.
Good. Then we can start. Please, Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Åke, for this introduction. And I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome the opponent and the evaluation committee. And also a warm welcome to you that are sitting here in the room, and also you who are watching and following this online. Today we will speak a lot about food waste, but I think it's important to put food waste in a bit of a broader perspective first before we dwell into the details of what I have been doing here. So I would like to start with this definition of sustainable development put forward by the work in Our Common Future, published already in 1987, that states that sustainable development is development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability for future generations to meet their own needs. So how do we do this? Well, one aspect of sustainable development is to ensure that humanity doesn't use natural resources and stress and overshoot critical Earth system processes, to the point that this stable state that we have been into is that has been very beneficial for us collapses. So this is one part. We also have another part to ensure that all people meet their have the resources to meet their own needs, such as healthcare, water, and food. So we need to balance this ecological ceiling and also the social dimension. And when it comes to food, this food system that we have today is responsible for transgression of several of the identified planetary boundaries, and also poses a threat to the ones that still are lying in the safe zone. But we are also falling short in the social dimension when it comes to food, because we have a lot of people that faces hunger, and at the same time we're wasting huge amounts of food. So we have an inefficient use of natural resources and a distribution dilemma here that we need to solve. And sustainable development has also been paved out by the United Nations in their Sustainable Development Goals. And the issue regarding food waste and food waste reduction is found under the Goal 12, that is called Responsible Production and Consumption. The target states that by 2030, we should halve global capital food waste at retail and consumer levels and reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. So this is what we need to do until 2030. But in order to halve something, there's also important to know where we are. So if we look at the Swedish situation, this is governed by the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency that keeps track of how the Swedish food system is performing in terms of food waste. Here, household is the largest contributor to food waste. However, the food service sector that I have been looking at is an important part. This is because roughly half of all midday meals are served within this sector. And actions implemented in a relative few places have the potential to reach a lot of people. So for instance, this can be compared to households where we need to successfully persuade roughly 4.5 million households to maybe reduce their food waste. Whereas the food service sector, we only need to reach 4,000 restaurants and 14,000 public catering units. And the benefit of working with also actors within the food service sector is that they follow the same kind of regulations. So there's a huge potential within even lowering this amount of food waste. So the aim and thesis objectives that I have been following, or I've been carved out here, is that I want to provide new knowledge on the food waste quantification and how to reduce food waste in the food service sector with the focus on the Swedish public catering sector. And I've done this with 5 objectives, where the first one was quite broad, that we wanted to quantify food waste within the food service sector at large, and basically investigate how much food waste do we have. The second objective was to identify risk factors for food waste generation. And we did so by looking into preschools and school catering units. So this was done in paper 2. Paper 3, we tried to develop models to forecast guest attendance to lower overproduction in school catering units also. And in paper 4, we went along and tested those forecasting models along with other types of interventions to see how they would affect food waste. In the 5th paper, we looked a bit large scale, how is the sector performing? And is it reasonable that the changes so far is at a sufficient pace so we can say that we can halve food waste by 2030, or are there other things that we need to put in place? And we wanted to track changes over time. So this has been the objectives, and now I will go through each of these objectives one by one, so to say. So we start with the first question about how much food waste do we have? And the material used for this is based on data covering 10 years, from 2010 to 2020. We collected data from 3,386 kitchens. And what should be noted here is that this data came in a variety of formats, from handwritten notes to dedicated software exports. So it's been a really nice flow of material. And all this material has been collected on site by the kitchen staff themselves, in most cases. The most commonly quantified food waste meal is the lunch meal. And the material here dominates by the Swedish public catering sector, but there are also instances where we have material from, for instance, Norwegian hotels and Finnish restaurants. So it's a mix of material, but the public catering is dominating this material. So how do we quantify food waste? Well, this is a basic chart of how a kitchen operates. You have food that enters in one end, and it goes through a multiple of processes where it hopefully is consumed by the end guest. However, in all of these processes, steps, there can be waste that occurs along the chain. And this is from receiving waste, storage waste, preparation waste, and safety margin waste. This occurs often in the kitchen. And very often when this is quantified, kitchens bundle all these processes together and call them kitchen waste. However, what we have looked at here is that, or what we have discovered is that the most quantified processes are waste occurring from the serving line and waste that comes from the plates of the guests. These are the most common quantified waste processes. And of course, there are other layers below this that you can also look at. You can, for instance, divide serving waste down into more and more fractions, but this is the level that most kitchens quantify waste at today. So, and you can also, if kitchens also quantify the amount of served food and the amount of guests that eat there and the amount of waste, this makes it possible to calculate waste per guests. So you get a relative indicator how much waste you have, and also waste of food served. So what we have done here is that since canteens maybe have different ambitions what they are trying to solve for problems. For instance, one canteen might focus on plate waste, where another one is focusing on serving waste. This might produce uneven and unfair results. So what we did in paper one was to establish a framework where we looked at, we had a criteria that we only looked at kitchens who had quantified serving waste, plate waste, and guest for a certain day. And that data point went on for further analysis. So if a kitchen missed to quantify plate waste for one day, for instance, this data point was discarded. And the results in terms of waste of percentage of served food was that restaurants had the highest reported median waste of served food with 24%. However, since we had this criteria in place, we only looked at serving waste and plate waste. This comes from 9 units, whereas, for instance, primary schools reported a median waste with 17%, but this covered 695 units. And this is due to we have more material that is coming from the public catering sector. And overall, the results are that 18% of the food served is wasted in the material that we have looked at. When it comes to the other indicator, food waste in grams per guest, restaurants also had the highest median waste with 179 grams per guest, and this was based on 89 units. Whereas primary schools had the lowest waste of 43 grams per guest, but this was based on 112 units. And everything here in between. So there's clearly that primary schools, but also canteens here are having quite low median waste levels compared to the other sectors. But we need to maybe have a bit more material from those parts where we don't know so much to be certain of this. So if we look at the different, if we divide the waste into the different fractions that I spoke about earlier, kitchen waste, serving waste, and plate waste, we looked at how the distribution between the different waste processes looked like. And this can help maybe also illustrate where there is largest potential for kitchens to start their reduction work if they don't know anything. So restaurants here had the largest problem with kitchen waste, mostly because they had extensive trimming and peeling operations in place, whereas, for instance, serving waste was mostly common in care homes, preschools, and primary schools. So if you are a primary schools, it is most likely that you should start to look at your serving waste fraction, although you need to actually do a quantification to verify this. Plate waste were most common in secondary schools and canteens, whereas hotels and hospitals had kind of equal amounts of serving waste and plate waste, but hotels had larger share of kitchen waste. So maybe they should look into that if they don't know anything at all. So this was how much food waste do we have? So why do we have this? And what risk factors do we have for food waste generation? And to look into this question, we looked at 177 kitchens coming from 5 Swedish public organizations serving preschools, primary schools, and secondary school students. And we looked at how different factors influence serving waste, plate waste, and total waste per guest. What we found was that kitchen type is a major driver of serving waste and total waste. And this is mostly likely to that when we spoke about kitchen type, we divide kitchen type in 2 types of kitchens. One is a production unit where you can save food for a later occasions, where the other type of kitchen is a satellite kitchen where you don't have the ability to store food and use for a later occasion. So here, if you are a production kitchen, you don't have as much serving waste, but if you're a satellite kitchen, you are likely to have more serving waste than a production unit. We also saw that portion size, which is how much food that is prepared to the actual number of guests, have a large impact on both the serving waste, plate waste, and total waste per guest, where there is very kitchens prepared too much food in relation to how many guests that actually turn up. So you need to have this really aligned. So we also looked at age and the age component, and we saw that older guests are more likely to have more plate waste. We also saw that if you have a really busy kitchen with a lot of guests coming into the establishment, you have more plate waste, and you also have a larger standard deviation in the number of guests, and you need more seats, of course, to serve all those guests that are coming there. And you also have more employees working in that kitchens. And we also saw that if you have more male employees in the kitchen, you are more likely to observe a higher degree of plate waste. But this is mostly likely due to that male tends to work in kitchens that serve more guests. So what could we do about this problem then? Well, we saw in paper 2 that we had this portion size was not matching the amount of people that actually ate in the establishment that we looked at. So we, in paper 3, we explored the potential of using different forecasting techniques to try to optimize and better understand the guest dynamics. Hör ni mig eller? Ja. And the problem is that food in most cases are prepared for all the enrolled students, whether they show up or not. And this difference often becomes waste. So we took attendance data from 21 schools during 2010 to 2019 with additional information when it was holiday and break. And we also optimized this from an economical perspective with economic data from this public organization. And what we saw was that we compared this to the reference scenario where schools are using enrolled students as their forecast. We saw that the mean average percentage error that you got is you get a 20 to 40% different compared to the best forecasting models that have roughly 2 to 3% mean average percentage error. However, you can have the perfect forecast, but forecasts sometimes will underestimate the demand. And this is deeply unwanted by the kitchen staff. So you need to have some kind of margin to this forecast to be of practical use. So in paper 3, we tried to seek out what this margin is so that the kitchens could use this forecast and it could be practical. So the question is then how much margin should you have before it is really practical and useful? So this was explored in paper 3. In paper 4, we tested this forecast along with other reduction strategies. The idea was that forecasting should reduce serving waste. We had a plate waste tracker that tried to nudge the guests in school catering units with a message, how much they throw away. And they could also see their own contribution in relation to the other guests. We also had tasting spoons on the serving counter so that children could taste food before they scooped up, and a simple awareness campaign with table talkers on the tables. And the idea was that these 3 were targeting the plate waste fraction. And we tested all these interventions in 2 school canteens each. And we had a remaining 7 kitchens as a reference group that did not have any of these in place. And we used a baseline scenario between 2014 to 2020 to compare this against, to see if these had any effect. What we saw that all of the canteens that had some of these intervention in place actually reduced the plate waste fraction. However, only where the awareness campaign and the forecasting were implemented reduced more than the reference group, where the awareness campaign reduced 13 grams per guest and the forecasting reduced 18 grams per guest, even though forecasting was not supposed to have any effect on the plate waste fraction. The same goes for the serving waste, with the notable exception that serving waste actually increased where we had the tasting spoons. But here, plate waste tracker was the most successful intervention with a reduction of 38 grams per guest. And this is also even though the plate waste tracker was not intended to lower serving waste, but the kitchens who used it had the ability to see what the guests answered in the device. So they may have altered their serving procedures according to that. So that might be an explanatory factor. But forecasting here was successful, and this was the intention also. In the 5th paper, we looked at changes over time. How is the Swedish public catering sector performing? And we saw that all of the different sectors from care home, hospitals, preschools, primary schools, and secondary schools are having lower median waste levels over time. However, and this data comes from a third of all the Swedish municipalities, so it's quite dense data material. However, this might also be the ones that are most interested in the topic. But what we saw was that if we put 2016 as a baseline year for having this halving of food waste by 2030, if we use 2016 as a baseline, we see that all of them are reducing the median waste levels. But maybe where we can be most certain of the reduction is in primary schools, because here is where we have the most dense data materials. We also try to scale these waste indicators that we have calculated to a national level via all of the Swedish school students, for instance, that eat in the public catering sector. So what we did was that we took the waste per guest for preschools and schools, and we scaled this up to the guests per year that the whole Swedish school system have to get the indicator in tons per year. And what we saw was that 2020, we had roughly 21,000 tons of food waste within preschools and schools. And depending on what indicator you use, you can get quite vast results. So for instance, if you take the median of each waste categories, which is the median of the kitchen waste, the median of the serving waste, and the median of the plate waste, and look at 2015 to 2020, you can observe a 45% reduction. Whereas if you take the median from all the organizations, you observe a 20% reduction. All this can be compared to the official Swedish statistics, which is based on very old waste indicators. So previously, we have had roughly 50,000 tons of waste in the preschool and school segment, whereas this indicator now has been updated. But in terms of the levels of food waste that preschools and schools should have by 2030 is that the level should be around 10,000 tons of food waste in that kind of sector. So that is the kind of level that they should aim for. If you use 2020 as a baseline, so to say. So what have I been doing here? Well, I think I've tried to establish that 18% of the food served is wasted in the material that we have looked at. And roughly 20,000 tons of food waste is generated in preschools and schools in Sweden as of 2020. Age and infrastructure are things that affect food waste, but it might be very hard for kitchens to actually do something about those factors. What they can work with is to serve food in relation to the guests that actually eat there. And here forecasting is helpful, but you need to balance these forecasts so it is a practical use. There are also other tools that you can use to lower food waste. And what we need to see now is the large use of these tools. So the 1/3 of the municipalities that have contributed here, they are heading in sort of the right direction, but they should not stop here. And the other 2/3 of the municipalities that have not contributed to the data here, they might have a large room to improve here and also tell us what they are doing so we can be certain of where we are going here. So that was all I had to say about that.
Thank you very much, Christopher, for presenting more than 4 years' work in half an hour. So now I will invite the opponent to come forward and take a seat here in the front and to start the discussion.
Should we sit maybe? Yeah. then the question is where we should sit.
I think you can sit here.
Yeah.
I think we should only see it if you anticipate it will take hours. Right. Okay. Well done, Christopher.
Thank you.
And first of all, I'd like to say that I'm aware that there is an option for me to make the slides, sort of to make a summary of your work. And to be honest with the audience and with the panel, I have started putting the slides together, but then I stopped as I was going through, this very comprehensive compilation of your outcomes. And the reason behind that is because I think you've done a very good job.
Thank you.
Having published 5 papers as the first author and having co-authored, how many? 8 papers more? Or is it, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's more than
I don't know.
You've lost count.
Yeah,
You've lost count. Well done. 13 papers more, with your supervisors, but also with external colleagues. I think it's a real achievement, and you should be proud of that. And I'm not trying, to be nice over here. I'm just being very straightforward because I come from Eastern Europe. So in Eastern Europe, we tend to speak straight. So if it's good, I tell you it's good. If it's bad, I will tell you it's rubbish.
I don't mind. Yeah.
I think in your case, it's good.
Thank you.
And as I have discussed with your colleagues and your supervisor, Matthias, I think in the UK, you would have already got a job because such an impressive list of publications would, any university would take you with open arms. Okay. And of course, when I was going through your papers, I've noticed some minor sort of inconsistencies, errors, mistakes, but I don't think it's something that we need to speak about today because no one is perfect. No. And overall, I think your work is great. And I will be honest with you, every time when I publish a paper or when I write a paper on this topic, then I tend to cite your work because I don't like the gender-related sort of, expressions, but I think your work has become seminal in the field of interest, which means, in the future, it will probably become, a reference for all the reports, but also for any policies that will be shaped around the topic of food waste. So that's the reason why I decided not to put together the slides. And then, your presentation was very comprehensive. And what's the point of, doubling your presentation so that the audience becomes bored? So therefore, I suggest I just ask you some questions. Yes. And mind you, these questions are not meant to be, the questions of criticism. These are the questions that I have as a matter of personal professional curiosity, because I think you have become an expert in the field of your research, and I think it's a real achievement, because in the UK we say if you know more than your supervisors, and Matthias, you didn't hear that, right? Then you can actually say that you've deserved your PhD, right? And from the presentation which you've just made, I think it's clear that you're an expert. Okay, so the questions which I'm going to ask you, it's just my personal curiosity. Yeah? And I will start with a very generic question, right? Just to put you at ease, because I can see you're sweating after half an hour.
You should see.
Yeah, exactly. I don't understand why you have this suit over here, because the instructions I received from the from your admin team clearly said, please do not use formal dress. And
okay.
Here.
I didn't get that information.
Okay, right. And I think the reason behind was, they were expecting you would be sweating, right?
Okay.
Right. So my first question, it's not scientific. It's very generic. Why is the topic of food waste, and why is the topic of food waste specifically in the sector of public catering? And the reason I'm asking this question is because I'm the only one in my department who does research on food waste. And my colleagues often joke, they say he must be a wasted academic, given that he has chosen such a bizarre topic. It's good because it's not sexy, right? It's not hot. A sexy topic would be digitization, biotechnology, call it, right? But why food waste? It's smelly, it's unpleasant, No one wants to speak about food waste, so tell me.
I think my first interest in food waste arose 2011 when I was working as a Well, I was assistant food inspector at the World Scout Jamboree that was held in Skåne in Sweden back then. And when this camp was over, there was pallets of food left. And I thought that this was the first time I was like, oh, wow, here we have a lot of resources that are not used at all. So that ended up with me having bouillon for like 4 years. So I stuffed that in my pack and went home. And then I've been working in Stockholm for a while and commuting, and this opportunity with food waste came up. And I started to look into that, and that was really interesting. And then the question was food waste within school kitchens. So that's the kind of really short story.
Sure. Can I ask you a cynical follow-up?
Yeah.
Given that you saw, the huge amount of food waste produced, and you were negatively impressed, right? And you started thinking about what can be done to reduce that.
Yes.
Why do you think other people don't, develop the same feeling? Because you have clearly shown us that plate waste is an important sort of challenge which we have to solve. And behind plate waste is people, right? Yeah. So why do you think some people tend to ignore the problem of food waste?
This has bugged me for a very long time, because I don't know. To me, this is an important question. But I mean, when I've been in, for instance, schools, and I can see that they are not there yet. Some students, but also some teachers. I mean, but some are. So I really don't know this behavior thing and the mechanism in place to actually
explore
that.
So
yeah.
Probably the assumption that I'm playing your job over here.
Yeah.
The assumption you like to explore in the future.
Yes, and also I think we have clearly seen that plate waste is one fraction here, but you also have a huge opportunity with serving waste, and there I think there can be more done. I think what we looked into paper 4, I mean, we had those 3 of the interventions that the organization implemented. I mean, the idea was to target plate waste, but I think there are more things to do with the serving waste thing. But then you also need to convey managers and so on that this is something that they should work with. But I think this is coming more and more, at least in the kitchens, some of the kitchens where we have looked into.
Sure, yeah.
They acknowledge, we have a problem with serving waste.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I mean, the question is rhetorical, right? I'm asking what can be done to ensure that people waste less food, and probably like yourself, I don't have the answer. And for me personally, I associate Sweden with sustainability. Right. I know that you guys, you do well compared to other nations, compared to the UK, for instance. I know that you do a lot in terms of sustainability. So for me, when I was reading your papers, an eye-opener was why food waste is not a priority over here.
Yeah, I asked myself the same.
Is it another rhetorical question?
Yeah. I think we have touched upon this, but I mean, you have a lot of structures for handling organic waste here, and I think as we spoke about a bit, I mean, you have these buses running on biogas, for instance. So I think here you might also have this problem with that. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, this is going to be biogas. So I think there might be some things that you have a competition of this as a resource. And I think that is a topic to explore. I mean, is this something, a feeling just, or is this for real? And how strong is this competition of these resources, and how do, for instance, households think about this?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, Sweden has become so much sustainable that it has started backfiring. Because like you're saying, people are aware that whatever they waste will probably be turned into biogas. And then, they think, okay, it doesn't really matter. There was an interesting study, not specifically in the field of food waste, but waste management in general related to recycling, experimental study. What they found out is that when people know that the recycling facilities are available in a restaurant, they tend to leave more plastic waste because they're thinking, okay, even if I leave it over here, it's going to be recycled anyway. So, but I think this backfire effect of, exceptional sustainability that has been adopted within the Swedish society and economy is something that is worth exploring in the future.
I agree.
So, by the way, are you planning to stay in academia in the future, or you're planning to move along?
Yeah, we have some ideas that are related to households that I would like to explore more. Also, households I think can be really, really tricky and challenging. But I think it is time to deal with that large. I mean, you saw the fractions that households. I mean, here we have something that can really, really matter, and hopefully we can do something about it.
Sure.
And there I would like to explore this. I mean, how can we quantify household food waste in a reasonable way that is not kitchen diaries? Mm-hmm. Because I think kitchen diaries is useless. But they work in 1 week and then you don't do it anymore.
That's right. So, but there is nothing better at the moment, right?
No, but hopefully there can be later on. I mean, I think
you can design something.
Yes. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Now we have some ideas, and the problem then is, okay, even kitchen diaries they use it for 1 week, and you kind of force them. But I think if we use another kind of system to monitor this, I mean, how do you get people to actually use this? Sure. And I don't think this will be a consumer product for households. That's I think this is would be a research tool then. So that other researchers in other parts of the world can also use this. Mm-hmm. So I think that is the kind of heading forward.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. And related to that, you have mentioned this. You've done your research within Sweden, yes. Yeah, which is understandable. But then, when I try to publish my papers in any journal, right, yeah. And I collect my data, let's say in Turkey, in the UK, in China, I always get these kind of questions from the reviewers. Okay, sort of it comes from the UK. How can we use across the world? What are the global implications? So how do you think the world can learn from what you have found specifically in Sweden?
I think what we have found is that, I mean, the results are kind of in line with some other countries. So I think there are definitely generalizability across. And I mean, then of course the question is, a Swedish preschools and a Finnish equivalent. I mean, they might be similar. How
you've just offended
the
Finns.
They might not be similar. But I think what we have discovered is that this, even within an organization, like a small municipality, it's a huge variation between the ones that perform the best and the ones that have, so to say, work to do. I think this is across the board. I think this is a global phenomenon, actually.
No, I agree. Yeah. So, but how do you think we can make those who are falling behind to follow, the suit, to follow the work which is done by those who are, well, the leaders in the field?
Yeah, I think at least on a small scale, I think if we start on a small scale, for instance, in an organization, I think there's plenty of room for the ones that perform the best to maybe teach out, okay, what are they doing? What works in their kitchens to the ones that have more work to do? I think there's an arena for knowledge transferability, so to say. Of course, there might be some factors that are in place that hinders this. I mean, they, for instance, maybe cannot store food for another occasions. I mean, you have those kinds of things. And I think the same can work also on a global level. But I mean, there are standards in place that you can use, and I think different countries have adopted also standards that are really, I would say, practical for kitchens to use. And then the question begins: okay, how to get them to actually use this quantification as a starting point? But I think to start small, I would say, and then expand over time.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And your focus is on public catering, which is understandable. I mean, to me, because it's public, it's funded from the public money, right?
Yes.
So my question is, how come the Swedish government does not make it standard for all, to follow the suit of those who are performing best?
Yeah.
Because it can be a requirement, right?
For instance, I mean, you have this, there is this legal concept. I mean, for instance, you have this Swedish environmental code that states that it is illegal to waste natural resources. So I think there are room to, and that you should use the best available technology. But the thing in Sweden is that this responsibility to follow this law is pushed down to the different municipalities. So they are the ones that are, so to say, responsible for fulfilling that law. And this can look very different and I mean, if you are about to, for instance, say that this is illegal, I mean, then you need to have some kind of threshold. When is it then not illegal? But I think maybe if it's illegal or not to waste food, I think it's more useful to try to change the wasteful behavior.
But I think to me that is partially because of the neoliberal economy in which we live, because the government doesn't want to take responsibility. They assume that businesses or whatever organizations are going to take responsibility, but then the organizations do not do anything. It becomes a vicious circle.
Yeah. But I think and I think you're partly correct also. And I think what I have observed when I've been visiting different public organizations is that you have this kind of grassroots movement that I call it, that they are very engaged. They want to do good things. So I'm very impressed by how far that they have come without any push from above, actually. So this amazes me every day, actually.
So do you think it's down to personality of the person in charge?
Yes, definitely.
And how do we nurture that, change in personality?
Wow, this is the 1 billion question, Now, I think one thing can be for organizations to actually incentivize such a behavior. I mean, that can be to not have this as a thing that you should do on top of your ordinary work. I mean, if somebody is in charge of this question, along with maybe, for instance, following food safety regulations, I mean, that might be reflected in the pay, for instance. So that might be a way to get people to work with this even more.
Sure. You mentioned incentives, which is very positive, right? How about disincentives?
Yeah, I think one such way could be to make it more expensive to throw away food. But then again, you always have this risk with, it's expensive to throw away food, then they will just dump it in the forest, for instance. So this is always the dangers with such mechanisms, I think. And I think this we have observed in Sweden, where we have restaurants that have bypassed this, like municipality monopoly of waste, and they declassify this as business waste, and then there's a private company that takes this and it ends up somewhere in the forest.
Sure.
So
how about disincentivizing consumers specifically? Because it was interesting to see. For me, I will be honest with you, the most interesting paper for me was paper number 4, right? Because, I come from the management background. It was interesting to see the interventions. because I understand the importance of numbers, right? As we say in management, you cannot manage something if you do not measure that. And what I like particularly in your PhD is that you have adopted this cycle, right? So you've got quantification element, then you've got the intervention element, and you've got the evaluation element. And I know that you did not present it here, but it's in your book, by the way. All please read the book, very interesting. How many copies have you got? 100?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some spare ones if you don't have. Yeah, so this loop was very informative, and I think that's very important, because very often people forget that actually we do not stop here. It goes in circles like that. So when it comes to the interventions, for instance, you spoke about awareness raising campaign, right? I will be honest with you, I'm rather cynical here.
Yeah.
I do not think education alone is going to help. Yeah, first of all, because we speak about education as something trivial, right? And secondly, education is long-term. We are not going to feel this effect now, right? And you mentioned that we need to reduce food waste. Well, not you, but the United Nations by 2030. So hopefully, when the new generation of consumers grows, then yeah, we may be there, right? But I don't think on its own education is enough, right? But yes, I'm aware that the effect of different labels is quite powerful, and I've seen that not only in public catering but also in private catering, such as in restaurants. But then the question for me: how do you measure the effect of this intervention, within the long term? Because you may have measured that today, but tomorrow it may be different.
Yes.
Right?
No, and I think here longitudinal studies are critical. I mean, this is also the paper number 4 is in a way a small case study. I mean, we observed this during one semester, and I think it is very critical to follow this kinds of interventions up. And if there's something I would like to, if I were to change something, I would maybe spend more time with the interventions and maybe investigate also more interventions. I mean, awareness campaigns and tasting spoons, they are very, very simple and they are very cheap. And I also agree with you that I don't think to have only those in place. I mean, you need something more. This is not enough for long-term effect. At least that is what I believe, and there's also been other studies that suggest the same.
Sure. What do you think about the business models which are so-called unconventional? There are some restaurants in the Netherlands, but also in China, where they ask you to pay for your plate waste. What do you think? Is there scope for application of these models here?
Yeah, maybe. I think I've started to see that, but from the other end, so to say. That you pay for the food that you put on your plate.
No, that's the one from Brazil.
That's the one from Brazil, yes.
Brazil is different because you pay by weight.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So,
and I've started to see that in Sweden now, which I think is very interesting.
Was it inspired by the Brazilians?
I don't know, but this was a really fancy lunch restaurant in Stockholm. And I don't know if it has spread.
Sure. But there is another model. It's not, it's unconventional because people don't like that. But in essence, whatever you have on your plate, sort of it gets weighted and then you're asked to pay. Not to pay directly to the restaurant. Normally it goes to a charity.
Okay.
So what do you think about this one?
I think that could be a nice, or at least interesting topic to explore.
Do you think in Sweden this would work, or people?
No, I don't think so. But
why are you saying it would be nice to explore that?
No, I think I've also seen other examples that it's in the same kind of neighborhood, so to say, but where they have removed so you cannot throw away plate waste. And then suddenly they claim that they didn't have any plate waste, and that this was in a school. And I think in a restaurant in Sweden, if you were to pay by food waste, it depends on what kind of customers the restaurant targets, I would say. So in some cases, I think it could work really, really well. And in other places, I don't think you will be very, very successful. Sure. Then you will just take this and you will go out the door and you will throw it in the nearest trash bin.
Right.
I think that's how it will work in those cases.
That's right. But mind you, in this case, you would not pay directly to the restaurant. You would pay to a charity.
No. Yeah.
Well, I know that the audience are not allowed to ask questions, so shall we ask them to raise their hands?
Oh, maybe we can do that. Yeah.
You're not allowed to speak, right?
Oh.
But would you like to raise your hands, those of you who would like to pay for your waste when you go out to eat? See, no one. Oh, no, they're being polite. They're just being polite.
So how many did we have? Okay.
Oh, quite a few.
And half, yeah?
Mind you, they are biased because
sure.
they are educated, right? They come from the university and they have listened to your presentation.
Okay. So maybe 10% then of this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm interested in these kind of things specifically because, you know, in Europe we tend to think about positive things, right? You should not go negative, but in some cultural contexts, it's the other way around, such as in China, for instance. You know, they do what they're told to do because of the historical context. And that's the reason why in China, some restaurants, they operate on this basis. And to them, it's okay. The Netherlands, it's an interesting case. I'm aware of 2 restaurants which do that. But like you're saying, they have a very special type of clientele. So they are vegan, and they make it very clear that they try to reduce the impact, you know, of their operations across the entire food supply chain. So yeah, probably that's the reason why it works over there.
Yes.
Okay, so my next question, I can see that the audience is getting bored. I'm just trying to entertain them a little bit. You know, public catering. Okay, I come from the School of Hospitality, so which is clearly for profit. To what extent can we use some of your findings in the sector of commercial hospitality?
Well, I think when I was on holiday this summer, I saw awareness campaigns in hotels.
In Sweden?
In Norway.
Norway.
This annoys me a bit because I see these awareness campaigns. It's a small sign. Be mindful of your food waste. When you have like this long table of food, buffet, which is and we were kind of, it was not many guests at the hotel at the time, so I didn't understand who should eat all this. But I think there are interests from the private sector to investigate in tools that can lecture their guests, actually. So for instance, this plate waste tracker might be interesting to, now I use this term, educate guests. But I think more successful would be for them to, and I'm pretty sure that they already have these forecasting systems in place and use
the chain affiliates. Yeah, they do.
They do. And some restaurants, I mean, as soon as this becomes plate waste, I mean, this is, they don't feel that this is their responsibility. It's the responsibility of the consumers to, that they should eat up their food. So they have left it, and that's why I think they are very interested in such tools, so to say.
So is it the same kind of attitudes in public catering, that, you know, it's not our responsibility, it's the responsibility of the guest?
I would say it previously that was the narrative when I traveled around, and this is anecdotally. I mean, you always hear these loud voices, but when we have examined these questions, where we asked kitchens, where do you think you have the most waste? They recognize that serving waste, most of them tell us that serving waste is the largest problem. And so this is, I don't know if this has shifted but I think there's more room to explore this question even more. How does the situation look like?
There could be even scope for alternative business models, because I know that you cited my paper. Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
But the research we did in Russia, in kindergarten specifically, well, I'm sure you know that children are quite peculiar audience, right? Because today they may like, you know, eating this, but tomorrow they may not like that. So what some kindergartens do, and it's interesting because in Russia we saw exactly the same split. You know, some kindergartens, the private ones, they were doing very well in terms of, you know, reducing food waste because they were money motivated. But the private ones, the public ones, sorry, they didn't care. So, but what we found out is that the private kindergartens, they would give smaller portions to the children. And then if the child wanted more, they would give it to them. So do you think something like that could be applied in Sweden?
Yes, and I think in some places they actually do that. I mean, you start small and you have this small bowl in the middle of, and you have a staff that serves. And if you want more, you get more. So
but why is it not widespread, this practice?
Yeah.
Because again, in Russia, we saw a substantial reduction in food waste when this practice was implemented.
Yeah, and I think this is also related to how many staff do you have at the preschools. And some staff, they have dedicated kitchen personnel that does this, and some in some other cases, this is put as a thing for the teachers to do, and they maybe not feel like this is their core thing to do, core responsibility. So I think here there is work to do. So in the cases where you have dedicated staff that does this, I think there it works really well because there's the responsibility is really clear.
So it's not only about food in this case, it's also about stuff, right?
Yes.
So we're speaking about the different dimensions of sustainability. So the social dimension comes into play. Okay. When it comes to your first paper, you presented a lot of numbers.
Yes.
And for me personally, it was very useful to see that, the sector is not doing enough and, more things need to be done in order to reduce food waste. But, I mean, from my perspective, when I did research in restaurants, so you come to a manager after the audit, right? And you tell them, look, for the last month, you wasted 200 kilograms of food. Yeah? I mean, to me, it was, wow, a lot. And the manager looks at the numbers and says, so what? So if I were you, I would try to attach the economic value to that, just to show, how much it costs in money. And we did this. And then, we came to them and we said, look, but, well, I'm sort of answering my own question already. Yeah, and sort of, for them it was an eye-opener because when they showed them that it was 20% of their cost, they say, we have to do something. Yes. So in your first paper, did you try to do something like that? And if not, why?
The material came from a lot of different places. And if I remember this correctly, I think we tried to estimate this, but we were not very successful because it came from a lot of different places and it was really difficult to backtrack this. So that was one reason. So I think, and the paper was also really pointy in all kinds of directions too.
Quite lengthy.
To add another dimension was also a bit, so we decided then, okay, we focus on all the numbers, and that is how this paper can contribute. But of course, this economical aspect is really, really important, and I think this can also be followed up in longitudinal studies. When it comes to the public catering sector and economics, I think there we might have some problems actually, because some of the municipalities, it is really tricky for them to provide these economical figures, even though they should. So it is very popular every once in a while to read how much a Swedish school meal costs, and you can look how much does the school meal in your municipality cost.
How much does it cost?
I think it's 22 Swedish kroner or something like that.
So it's £2.
Yeah.
In the UK, it's £1.20, if I'm not mistaken.
You see, But what we forget is that half of the municipalities, they cannot answer these questions. Right. So it is hard, or they have not answered it. They might, could, so to say.
Okay.
But I think that is really interesting, and I think they should maybe be able to answer this question.
Okay, that's fine, So you spoke about nudging consumers. For the sake, of the audience, nudging means you try to convince people that they should reduce food waste. So does this mean that we should also nudge somebody else, not only consumers?
Yeah, I think kitchen staff is important. They are, I mean, circling back to the earlier in the discussion, I mean, I spoke about this grassroots movement, and you really have this person that is often one in the staff that really drives this question forward. I think you need to have such people, and I mean managers are gatekeepers in canteens. I mean they are the ones that decides if what will happen and what will also not happen.
That's right. So how can we nudge managers?
Yeah, I think money here is an interesting aspect, even though we haven't looked at this. But I also think to have more room for acknowledgement that they do a good job here.
Recognition.
Yes.
How about competition? Have you thought about competition? Because it's public sector.
Yeah.
There could be prizes.
And one reason why, for instance, the Swedish Food Agency do their own mapping of the food waste situation is that municipalities should compare themselves with each other. And I mean, this can also backfire, I would say, because you don't want to be the kitchen that are on the top of the list that have the most food waste. So I think an element of competition can be good, but you need to work with this gamification a bit, so to get to work in the most optimal way.
Sure. Well, I can share with you experience that we had in our canteen. So we had a competition across the departments. It was at my university. So every time when somebody comes to take food, you would need to say, you know, which department you come from. And then when you bring your plate waste back, they would measure that, right? And the idea was to encourage, and every month they would compare how much food waste was generated by the representatives of each department, and they would take, well, the medium, right? Because from one department there could be 10 people, from another 50. So, and the idea was in the monthly communication, you know, it was written, well, congratulations to that department. They have produced the smallest amount of food waste, and sort of, you know, that department needs to be improved. So do you think something like that could work?
For sure. I mean, I've seen such schemes in some organizations. And I think they call it the golden, not the golden plate. This is for consumers, but the equivalent of the kitchen staff, like the golden chef hat or something like that. But the problem that public catering has had, not problem, but very often they quantify food waste for 2 weeks during the autumn or 2 weeks during the spring. So this feedback loop is very, very slow. But there are organizations that have now, I mean, they quantify food waste every day. So there you have actually the ability to do those kinds of interventions, so to say, because you have a quantification as a foundation to follow up if this works or not. And I think you need to have some kind of quantification in place to be able to do that in the public catering sector. So I'm positive.
Agree, yeah. You know, when it comes to plate waste, did you try to figure out why people do not finish meals? Because you've quantified, which is fine, right? But the numbers do not speak in a way that you do not get the detailed explanation.
No, and I think this is, I mean, we ask people, but we haven't put any numbers to that yet, and that is left to do. But when we speak to them, they mention time, that they don't have enough time to finish their plate. They also complain that it is a messy environment, and also, I mean, some guests that we meet, I mean, they eat their lunch meal really, really early. I would not consider that lunch, and I eat lunch early.
Well, I will share with you my experience. When your supervisor invited me for lunch at 11:30, I thought it was a little bit too early.
Yeah, you see, huh? And these kids, they eat lunch at 10. So,
Well, but if people say it's too early, why not to reschedule the delivery of service?
Yeah,
not to make
and here you have this dining hall, and it has a certain capacity that is, in many cases, it is built 30 or 40 years ago, and it is not maybe it has not been built out to fulfill the needs of today. So you kind of try to squeeze in as much people as possible, and what you do then is, yeah, of course you fiddle with the schedule, because then you can have more people that can use the facilities.
Sure.
So, but I agree. I mean, maybe you can only eat lunch every second day, and then you have kind of solved that problem. But I think then you will have other problems as well. So,
yeah, of course, yeah. I'm surprised you didn't mention taste as a driver of plate waste. So people were satisfied with the quality of food?
This is really a hot potato, I would say. I mean, whether the most popular or the most unpopular meals get wasted, and I think we did a kind of early thing with one municipality where we tried to look at taste, but I mean, it was as we asked children what they think, and it's very hard to ask children because they don't tend to answer a bit differently every time you speak to them.
In the UK, it's not because of that. It's because it's very difficult to get ethical approval for asking children.
Yeah. But I think here, I mean, this is also in the interest of the public catering organization. Sure. And they don't need ethical approval.
Yeah, they can do that, right?
Yes,
they can speak to children.
So, but I think we have now followed one municipality that wanted to investigate this regarding popular and unpopular dishes. So this is on the way, so to say.
Okay.
And there are indications that popular dishes are wasted less than unpopular dishes.
Right. Okay.
Some indications in that direction.
Right.
But this is not done yet, so to say.
Sure, yeah. So directions for future research. Yeah.
So I mean, taste is a component for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, when I was reading your paper, I was just missing that element. Okay, plate waste is generated by why? What is the reason behind? How about nutrition? So in Sweden, the food which is offered in schools, does it need to meet specific nutritional requirements?
Yeah.
In terms of the number of calories that you can eat? Because in the UK, for instance, there is a nutritionist. In Brazil, the research which you've just discussed, each restaurant, well, not each restaurant, but all 10 restaurants, they have sort of clusters of restaurants. By law, they're obliged to have a nutritionist. And the nutritionist needs to ensure that the meal does not exceed a specific number of calories.
And I think it's the same in Sweden, that in this Swedish school law that states that the school meal should be for free. I think now I don't know this by heart, but I think there's a passage there that it should also provide enough nutritional components and value or something like in that direction. So there is an element of that. And this is then, but I don't think anybody follows this up. I know that municipalities, they have people that work with this, but as far as I understand, this law is the Swedish School Administrative Board that is supposed to follow up this law. And I don't think that they have any dietitian or nutritional person working there, as far as I know. So I don't think this is follow up. And I think this law is fairly new.
Yeah. But given that people generate plate waste, does it mean that they do not consume enough food in terms of the nutritional value?
Yeah, this is a good question.
Well, I did my best.
Yeah. No, I think we have also a problem in Sweden that maybe people eat. We have obesity as a problem.
And that will be my next question. Yeah. So don't go there.
Okay. Okay.
Answer this one.
So what was the question?
No, does it mean that if people do not finish their meals, does this mean they do not consume sufficient calories?
I think this might depend. I think now in general, I think. I mean, boys maybe don't get enough fiber in general, and girls doesn't get enough iron. Now I'm in deep water here because this is not what I've been looking at. But maybe, of course, there might be such an element. But if they don't eat there, but the question is then, what do they eat? I mean, do they go to the school cafeteria instead? And
yeah, that's right. Because from my perspective, if I were in charge of a school, I would think about, okay, if there is too much plate waste, does it mean that they actually undereat? So I would be worried about that, right? Yeah. Because you have a duty of care, yes, what they call in the UK, if you provide public catering.
Yes. And I think this is a bit strange in the Swedish context, that you have this public catering organization that offers a really good lunch option. And this is often governed by this public catering organization. And then you have the school organization that have a competing business operating a school cafeteria next to the dining hall. I think this is a bit strange in some cases.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned obesity. So have you considered so-called metabolic food waste?
No, but my colleague Nina, she works on that topic. So maybe.
Why did you abandon that hot topic and focus on numbers instead?
Yeah. You cannot do everything, right?
No, good answer. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
No.
But do you think this has the potential?
For sure. And I think I am learning about this concept of metabolic food waste.
So explain to the audience what metabolic food waste is.
This is when you finish your plate, even though you maybe are feeling full. So you you eat more than you need.
And that leads to obesity.
Yes.
So it's quite a tricky issue, right? Because if you look at the literature, well, I know the person from Italy who tried to publish the paper on metabolic food waste, it was rejected by multiple journals because they were saying you cannot really call obesity, waste, right? Because that may, insult some people. But those guys from Italy, they were very bold, straightforward. They said, if we overconsume, this is wastage of resources. So, and they claim that whatever assessment you do, you need to consider that too, given that, well, in developing countries, it's not yet an issue. But having said that, if you see the fast food chains come in there, and apparently there is a correlation when a fast food chain enters a new market, the obesity rate goes up. Yeah. So this is food waste. Yeah. Yeah? So do you think could be integrated into your future assessment?
Yeah, I need to think about that.
But your colleague is already doing that. So yeah. Probably you shouldn't, no?
Yeah, no, but I mean, you can always help, huh?
Yeah, why not?
No, but my mind has been not so occupied with that end of the spectrum, so to say, yet. But I think it's an interesting concept. And I'm also a bit curious to follow it to see where it might lead.
Sure, yeah. Okay, coming back to plate waste, we spoke about, well, we touched upon incentives, but then to me there is a lot of scope to apply different types of incentives when it comes to children, such as you mentioned gamification, right? Can you elaborate on that more?
Yeah, this is where you make. In paper 4, we have those interventions in place. And then the public catering organization, they organize this competition for school children. So the schools that had the lowest plate waste, they receive this golden plate. And I think they also received ice cream as a reward for their good work.
The school or the children?
The children. Maybe also the staff.
The school teacher. Yeah.
Who knows? And this is something that they have been running now for quite some time. And this golden plate jumps around to different. And it is very fun to call them every year and ask them, okay, what unit received this golden plate this time? So this is gamification, that you have some kind of element that try to nudge people.
But this is gamification at the school level.
Yes.
Have you thought about gamification at the consumer level?
For private restaurants, you mean, or
no, for schools.
This is for school children.
Okay. Right. So it's not for the school. It's not the school which gets this golden plate. It's the specific child.
Okay. Okay. The school gets the plate, but
the children get the ice cream.
Yes. So.
Okay.
But they are reminded that they have done a good work with having this plate.
Right. Okay, that's fine.
And I don't think it is in gold either. I mean real gold.
Yeah.
It's more like a symbolic.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Because we did something similar. In Russia again. That was commercial restaurants, and what we found out is that when families dine out with children, the children represent very interesting intervention points. Because when you tell them, if you bring empty plate, you get a small bar of chocolate.
Yeah.
Then, of course, the question is, you transfer the problem of food waste to the problem of diabetes, probably, right?
Yeah.
But it worked.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. We observed the children would come to their parents and they said, mommy, you didn't finish, because I want to get my chocolate bar. So that was interesting for me personally. So I wonder if something like that could be applied over here. I'm speaking about the commercial sector.
Yeah, I think so. I haven't heard about such
nice things
yet, but I think there is for sure room to have such things in place.
Okay.
And I think they could be really effective. I think I've read some Austrian or Italian work that is in the same approach, that they have this kinds of intervention in a sun and bath hotel somewhere in Europe, where they also try to gamificate the guests to lower food waste. And as far as I understood the work, it was very successful, but it was also very controlled, I think. But I don't know the role of children in that research. I need to read up on that.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Coming back to plate waste and the reasons behind. You spoke about kitchen staff. So do you think chefs represent an important stakeholder to look at in this perspective?
Maybe not the main kitchen chef, but sometimes, school children in Sweden, when they discard plate waste, they do this at the dishing, where they hand in the dishes. And there it is usually a person that works, that collects these dishes. And sometimes I get the feeling that if you have a tall 2-meter guy that stare small children in the eyes every time they scrape off, I think that can be a really effective intervention.
I don't think that will go past ethical approval.
No,
this intervention.
But this is the feeling, and I think that might be more effective than the plate weight tracker, for instance. That you have this human element.
That's right. Yeah, authority.
Yeah,
for sure.
Authority.
But what do you think about the role of parents in this case?
Important, I would say. I think, and I read this in your work also, and I think this is really interesting, where you have this connection between parents and children in the kindergarten. And I think I don't know if this is happening in Sweden to the extent that you describe it in Russia. So I think there is some room to learn here. I mean, could this be the things that they learn in preschool? And if you take parents with them, can this? How does this affect the household food waste?
That's right. Yeah. The spillover effect. Yeah. Well, we are building on that project now, so you're more than welcome to join if you're interested. Because we would like to see if actually, the food consumption at home affects food consumption habits, in a kindergarten and the other way around. Because if you look at theories, and I'm sure you know that some theories are useful, but similar to models, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So according to theories, that should work, but we don't really know if it works in practice.
No.
Okay, but I personally think it's an interesting topic, not because I wrote it in my paper, but that came, as a result of the field study.
I think there's something to investigate there, definitely.
But chefs, you think chefs who cook food, you think they're not worth intervening?
For sure. I mean, if you cook awful food, then you have a problem, because I don't think people will eat it. So I mean, you need to have a certain level, and that is important. And I think that is also why Swedish public catering organizations, they try to recruit chefs from the private business, and they do so by offering maybe not as much money, but conventional working hours. They don't need to work late and so on. So they are trying to recruit professional staff that way. And some are having also problems recruiting professional staff because they want to have professional staff that can work with their food. So yes, I think that is very, very important. And I think that can also affect plate waste, but I don't know to what degree.
Sure. Okay. Well, people have started leaving. I know it's a clear sign that we need to round up. A couple of extra questions. Are you familiar with the concept of industrial symbiosis, which originates from Denmark and Sweden?
No.
No, it suggests that, there is no such thing as food waste, and anything may become a raw resource. Right? So food waste, for instance, can be composted, and then you can grow food, right? And for instance, what can be done, and this is being done in Sweden at a national level, right? So all food waste is collected, then it's put into a specific area, and then you sort of generate biogas out of that, or you can compost it, right? And you can use it as a fertilizer. So do you think, because it's public catering, I was trying to explore this topic in the context of commercial catering, and it didn't work because of space constraints, and because the restaurant managers were saying it's not exactly, what our business is for, but because, it's public, so, it has to generate societal value. Yes. So could it be possible that, whatever food is wasted within a school is composted within the school? And then it serves not only, as a basis for growing food, which can then be used in the kitchen of that school, but also as an educational element that, children can actually go and you can show them, look, we are growing this food over here, you're going to consume it, and, do not waste. But if you do waste, it goes in circles.
Show
Have
this.
you come across such examples here in Sweden?
Not to the extent that you describe, but I know that there have been at some places that I visited ideas in that direction. But I think what you describe here is totally doable, and I think that is it's only a matter of resources that needs to put in place to.
Well, that's the most important thing, resources.
Yeah.
But do you think people would be willing to do that?
I think if you have, I think you need to have a good collaboration then between the different organizations within, you need to have someone in the kitchen that is interested. You need to have a teacher that thinks this is a good idea. And you also need to have the school on board on this. But I think it is not unrealistic that you could find those people. And I think this could also be a great project idea for instance, agencies to fund educational activities in that direction.
I can see Matthias is taking notes. Probably he's going to apply with this project very soon.
No, but I think that is it's a good proposal to go forward with.
Yeah. Okay, right. Speaking about the methodology, right? So I have no question about your numerical skills. I think they're outstanding. Tell me about interviews.
Yeah. In general, or?
Yeah. how do you feel? Because, all your papers, I can see, when I was reading your papers, I had a feeling that they're written by a quantitative researcher.
Yes.
And now I see that I wasn't wrong.
Yeah.
So, but how about interviews? I know that some people are a bit apprehensive about interviews, and I started as a quantitative researcher, but then I've sort of softened for some reason because I moved towards the management field. And in management, you need to make people speak, right? So numbers do not speak on their own. They need to be explained. And this is how I developed passion in qualitative research, right? And when I try to publish my research, normally, if it goes to a good journal, waste management, resources conservation and recycling, then normally it gets rejected because the reviewers say, oh, how can you get anything meaningful from 25 interviews, right? But what I'm missing here in your research is that interviews could have actually given you an extra layer of analysis, such as, for instance, when it comes to taste. You did mention that we spoke to them, right? But if you did some in-depth interviews and then if you could follow that up with a questionnaire, and now you become quantitative, you analyze the data and you can actually, use qualitative research to inform quantitative research. But I'm just wondering why qualitative research is not that much featured in your studies. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Yeah, it's totally fine to have a PhD based on quantitative data only. But why did you ignore the qualitative one? Is it because you didn't like it?
No, I think I did not ignore it. But maybe I did not use. I went to a lot of places, and of course I spoke to them, and of course this could be a semi-structural interview.
If you follow specific guidelines.
If I do that. But I think at the time I didn't, and then of course you remember things and you write stuff down. So maybe that is something that I can work on more in the future to get that also explanatory element to what we are doing, because I think the most interesting things is when you have this mix, because then you can sort of explain things in a different way.
Yeah, mixed methods.
Yes, exactly. So I'm hoping to learn more about that in the future, and how do you do this in a reasonable way?
Yeah. And as a follow-up question, again, the most interesting paper for me is paper 4, right? Interventions. But to me, your interventions were a little bit descriptive in a way that you could have done some experimental research over there. So what do you think about experimental research design in the context of food waste?
Extremely hard.
Hard or hot?
Hard.
Hard, but hot.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the problem, if you would have a really proper experimental setup, is this element of random assignment. I think that's the key question. And I think if you can have this random selectment and it actually works, it is a random selectment, then you have something really nice going on. But the problem, we cannot really force people to quantify food waste yet, or I don't think we will ever be able to do that. And I think we cannot force people to use interventions either. So this is our problem, and I think all of us have this problem. We cannot do this, and I've been thinking how this could be done in the most best way, and so far, I need to think more about that. How we can do this really experimental setup.
Time, after today, the reason I'm asking this question is because you have developed such good contacts with, with the public catering organizations. You can actually utilize these contacts in order to do, experiments.
Yes.
And I think, you're right. Design is very important, but if you know what you're doing, the implementation in real life settings is very good. Because I see a lot of experiments, not a lot of experiments, some experiments being published, but they're so-called quasi experiments. People are asked to do a survey using, Survey Monkey or whatever. And to me, there is not really an experiment. Because you cannot compare the situation whereby you are there, right? You smell food, you see food, and whereby you see that your laptop and sort of asking questions, hypothetical questions about what I would do if I were in that situation. I think you're very well positioned to do experimental research if you're interested, and if you have developed, the right skill set, and potentially in the future, if you stay in academia, there is something that you should consider doing, in my opinion.
No, and I think that is also what I mentioned before, that if I would to do something more, that is definitely do more interventions and spend more time in that area, so to say. And now we are hopefully also post-pandemic, so you actually can be on site more. I think that has also been a limiting factor and also an annoying factor.
Yeah. The dear chairman is standing over there, so I have just one question left. So I suggest we do that question and then we take a break.
Perfect.
And then I hope Christopher is not going to take too much time to respond to that question. So the question is the future.
Yeah. Wow.
So you've done, what you've done that. Okay. And you have become an expert. So having published so many papers, having seen so many, public catering organizations. So you know how the problem of food waste is there, what needs to be done. So what do you think are the hot topics for future research in the context of food waste?
There are a lot of unexplored tools to use and to look into how do we get staff to use those tools to reduce food waste, I would say. That is the major thing. And the second one is now we have kind of approached the most interested ones. They are the ones that have been willingly collaborated with us. And the second, the follow-up on that is then how do we reach the rest? How do we get them engaged? I would say that is a future hot topic to explore.
Okay, but there is a saying in English. After you've done your PhD, you have to leave the shadow of your supervisor.
No, you mean okay? Yeah.
So no. I meant you answered what I meant. But if you were to become an independent researcher, where do you see most of the potential lies? And that may not necessarily relate to food waste.
No.
It may be something different.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. My PhD was about sustainable tourism. So it was about sustainable consumer behavior, how to make people, travel less.
Yeah.
As you can see, I failed, right? So people still fly. And the pandemic didn't help, unfortunately, in this case.
No.
On the way to here, my flight was full, fully booked. So, but then I moved towards food waste. I have developed that interest, right? And that was the result of freedom, because I asked you the question why you were interested. In my case, it was exactly the same thing. I just saw so much food was wasted. But then also remember in my family, I was told to never waste food. For instance, when we ate, if we didn't finish bread, so the bread would never be put into the bin.
Okay.
So it would be given to birds, it would be given to animals, and that prompted me to think, the system is wrong at the moment. We need probably, to adopt that old-fashioned approach. And this is how I moved from sustainable sort of tourism towards food waste. So what do you think are the topics in the future that are worth exploring, given your interests and your knowledge of the field?
Yeah, I think how can we minimize wasteful behavior in general? I would
behavior.
Say. Yeah. I think that's something to explore.
So you're going to work with people from now on?
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. I don't know.
That's the dangerous thing,
Yeah, but there's also, food waste and topics left to explore, I would say also.
Oh, yeah.
But I need to think about this.
Okay. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're done, dear Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't mean it's being rude to interrupt, because I think it's just time for a leg stretcher. And then you are perfectly free to continue after the break, if you like to.
Would you like to continue after the break?
Yeah, I'm trying to see what feeling I'm getting here from the audience.
So you can see they're smiling because they know that it's going to be a break. So probably we should not be continuing after the break.
No, maybe not. Yeah, it's okay.
No, I think what I've seen over here and how you responded to me, I'm more than satisfied.
And I'm looking forward to also discuss even more afterwards.
Of course. Yeah. This is what I'm here for.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you.
Thank you.
Done.
You're sitting right in the spot. So, welcome back, everybody. I will resume now, and we will continue. And now with questions from the evaluation committee. And my suggestion is that we start here with Ingela in the room, and then we go to Katarina, and then we go to Tom. And then it's of course possible, I mean, afterwards also to follow up on others' questions in order to have a lively discussion. So you have not spent your time by just asking a few questions. We can continue the discussion if there is something which will appear interesting to discuss. So I will leave the microphone here to Ingela. Please.
Thank you. My name is Ingela Marklinder and I am from the Food Studies, Nutrition and Dietetics at Uppsala University. Do you hear me? And very well done, Christopher. You have clearly showed that it is a red thread in your thesis, I think. And first you have the quantification of waste and identification of risk factors and suggestions for different solutions, interventions, and in the end, it is an analysis in relation to global reduction targets. And you have a very high number of publications in your thesis and also outside the thesis. So how come you did not defend your thesis earlier?
Why rush? No, I think we had the other things that are not in the thesis, they are things that have popped up on the side, so to say, that has been an opportunity. So I've seized that opportunity. But these 5 ones have been, or at least the 4 first one have been the main topic, and the 5th we developed kind of late, I would say. But it's a good question. I don't have a good answer. I think this was the way that we paved out, and I followed that, so to say. I didn't know that you could do this earlier, but I think this thread that we have here it works very well. So yeah, but maybe you could have picked another thread based on other articles and made that to a whole as well, maybe.
But it is important you have a red thread in your thesis, as I told you. Is the journal Sustainability a predatory journal?
I asked this question to the guest editor. And maybe if you ask this question to the guest editor, maybe you will not get an honest answer. But I trusted the guest editor, and he said, no, this is not a predatory journal. I mean, you pay a fee, they do this work, you have this review process, and so on. But I know that there are some people that maybe argue that some publishing companies are having a mechanism in place that maybe is a bit questionable. What I remember from my experience with sustainability was that it went really, really fast. And as this was my first experience in publishing a paper, I thought that this was normal. Until we tried other journals, and I discovered that this was an exceptional case. But if this is a predatory journal based on the time it takes to publish a work and review the work, I cannot really answer.
It has been the MDPI journals overall has been singled out as predatory, but not all of them, but especially sustainability has been extreme in the number of self-citations.
Okay.
But I could see that you have just cited yourself 3 times in that, specifically your publication. So it seems to be okay, as 15% is a normal threshold. Now I jump into the paper 4. It would be interesting to see how they, just in the intervention, the tasting spoons, how was it performed?
You mean how did they actually do this? Yeah.
Because if they eat directly from the serving vessel, how would it be in a hygienic way?
No, I think there were tasting spoons and there were instructions how you should use it. And I mean, first of all, there were these plastic ones, so they were disposable. So they did not. The idea was not to use it directly in the buffet line, so to say. But if this was the case or not, I do not actually know. But the instructions were that you scoop up and then you try.
Okay, put it on a plate.
Yes,
first.
put it on a plate first and then. So that was the instructions. But I cannot guarantee that this was followed strictly, so to say.
Did you write that in the thesis? Because I could see for myself that they were eating directly
okay.
from, but
I think there is a passage about this. But since you have misunderstood this, there might be room to clarify this.
Whatever, other things to read. And then you've been very innovative in the suggestion to include food waste quantification in the HACCP system. But the HACCP system is an instrument to help food businesses operators to attain a high standard for food safety. So would it be possible to include food waste? Because this is the European food legislation.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if it would be able to control and monitor it if it's not included in the legislation.
No, but there are other legislations that are coming that businesses should actually, or member states should quantify food waste. And then, then different member states can interpret this in different ways. So I mean, for instance, I think it is Spain, I've heard that there they actually demand that businesses should quantify food waste as a thing of their normal work. Of course, I don't think in that case it is in the HACCP system. I think that is used as a kind of side systems.
Yes.
But my argument here is maybe that if you have this HACCP system in place, there might be room to expand this to also cover this. And maybe you need to also change the legislation then so that this works. But this is an explanatory idea. I mean, if you are doing something and this is in place, why not use it and just expand it? If this is feasible or not, this might be a topic to explore.
Maybe a new legislation.
Maybe. Or maybe we can amend some legislation that is already in place so we don't get another legislation to keep track of.
The future will show us.
Yes.
And the last one then, in the paper 2, I'll go back to paper 2 now. One of the conclusions was that plate waste increased with age.
Yes.
How sure are you?
Well,
is it age?
Well,
something else?
I mean, I think we have this concept of comparable age. I mean, so if you take 2 age groups, the older age group is more likely to waste more food than the young group. But I mean, this is based on the material that we have observed. But I think this age was not as strong as the other factors that we investigated. So I think here the need is to follow up this, and basically all the factors that we explored in paper 2. I mean, this is a snapshot over the situation in that setting at that time, and it would be really interesting to see how this have developed over time. And I'm reading up on how this can be performed now, but so maybe age is super relevant now, even, or maybe it isn't.
Maybe in the next project.
Maybe, yeah.
But very, very well done, and
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So let's go to Katarina, please.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, congratulations to a very well-written thesis and an impressive work with a big range of different aspects of food waste. So I was really impressed, and I really enjoy reading all the papers, and it's even hard to find the weaknesses and ask critical questions. So, but I will ask a few questions, maybe put and put your work in a context. So I'm going to ask questions maybe because I come from nutrition and food habits and that side. So for paper 1, you talk about in the method section the difference between different kinds of food waste. Edible and inedible food waste, but then it's not really clear if you were able to separate inedible food waste from your assessment and what you put in your table as total food waste.
No, I mean, we were not. I mean, this concept of, I mean, if you look at the food waste bin at the end of the day, I mean, everything is a gray mess. So I think I mentioned this concept of inedibility and inedibility. I think there are also mentioned in some other papers as well, but this is not, we haven't explored this at all, I would say.
No.
And of course, this could be explored, but it requires a lot of quantification work to actually, detect, what is edible or inedible. And then you also, the one that are actually making this categorization, then you also have like I think it's edible, but maybe you don't. So, you have this personal conflict when you quantify this as well. So this is really, really tricky, I think. So I think we just mentioned it and then we left it and then we, leave it there, so to say.
Because I'm thinking that a lot of it is preparation waste when you sort of from vegetables, roots, sort of peels, pits, you cut up bad part of cucumbers, or every 10th tomato you get is already bad, or there's a mold, or so there's a lot of preparation during preparation. But I noticed also that restaurants were included. So, for example, coffee sump, if you serve a lot of coffee, if you serve a lot of coffee, you generate waste in that way that is maybe not unwasted. It has already been used in a way. And I'm also thinking that if you're a restaurant or a school that make an effort to serve healthy plant-based food with a lot of fruits and vegetables and roots and so on, that will generate more waste in the preparatory phase than a school that just do rice, pasta, hot dogs, whole meal, or fish sticks, or that kind of food.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, in that regards, they are punished for doing maybe something good in terms of food waste volumes.
Yeah.
But I think what they should do is to compare themselves against themselves, so to say. So I mean, I think there's still, I mean, if you are having such a kitchens that are serving more plant-based food and have this very nice kitchen operations where you actually use those raw materials, I think you should compete with yourself instead of others, because I think it is not really comparable. I mean, of course, you will have, then you should compare yourself with other kitchens that are similar instead of other kitchens that have vastly different systems, so to say, on how they prepare food. But now we are not there to categorize which kitchens have such things in place. So maybe that can be the next step to also diversify kitchens in that way.
Yeah.
But
I agree.
I understand what you mean here, Katarina. And I think we will see more waste from vegetables and so on, because Swedish public catering is also changing to serving more in that direction, I would say. And this is something that has been going on for quite some time now. So that is the trend, at least, generally.
Yes, great. And then I was thinking about paper 2, about the trying to estimate or forecast the number of guests that will come for lunch, you know. And besides your elaborate method, which is based on, you know, statistics, do you know of any more hands-on, simpler methods that could be used in schools
to estimate the number of guests?
Yeah, that are expected.
There are two ways, I would say. The one is really simple. I mean, if you know how many guests you have, okay, so this is Thursday today. So they are planning the meal for Friday, right? And they want to know how many that will show up tomorrow. Then they should take the amount of guests that were last Friday. That is a pretty good guess of how many will turn up. The other approach is to do as they do now. I mean, don't count at all, or have this enrolled students, and then they gradually cook less and less food and see where the threshold is. Where do they get the shortage? Where do they get angry parents? And I think the second approach has been tested, that they gradually decrease this. But the problem is then that the schedule, the school schedule, is that it is the same kind of pupils that will have no food every day. So you also need to work with the schedule to have not the same student get no food all the time. So, but that is a really hands-on approach, I would say, that works fairly well. But again, it is not a perfect, but it is a good guess, I would say.
Yeah, I know schools in Västerås, the attendance or leave data. So as a parent, you have to report in the morning before the school day starts that, oh, my child is sick, my child will not come to school today. And you do this electronically mostly. So that data goes straight to the kitchen.
It does in Västerås?
Yes.
Oh, good.
So the people in the kitchen knows exactly, okay, 53 kids are sick today. So they deduct 53 portions. right away.
And I think that is very good, that if you have a system such as that in place that actually works, that is great.
Yeah.
I heard some other versions of that, but this was some years ago, that they had all this information, but it was not available for the kitchen, which I think is a really pity. And there, I mean, this is just a communicational thing. I mean, you need to get people to speak with each other. So I'm really happy to hear the development.
Yeah, so Västerås, the city of Västerås were very proud. They told me about the iPads. They put up iPads in the kitchen, and the staff could just read off the iPad and about missing children that reported staying home every day. All right. All right. So for paper 3, I was wondering if the type of food or the type of dish was included, like if it was lasagna, fish, hamburgers, and so on in the analysis.
No, it wasn't. We tried to do that, to include the menu. But it is very tricky how the menu is. It's a lot of work to get a standardized menu, because you can write meatballs with potatoes in, I swear, it's 15 different ways you can. So it's a lot of data washing that it was too cumbersome to do that at the time. But of course, I mean, the type of meal, especially in upper secondary schools where you maybe have the options to go elsewhere, I think that is critical to also include that. We have done some work when we did paper 3, that we tried to see the absence based on if we typed in certain dishes and see the level of dropout, so to say. But it was very, very raw, I would say. But of course, that can have an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, because like sometimes cooked fish is not so popular, but since the school needs to provide nutritious lunches, they include fish almost every week. So I guess there's a preference there.
Yes.
And
I mean, here you have different things that you need to. I mean, you need to provide this nutritional value, and what should you then serve, and so I think this concept of meal acceptance is also something to explore here.
Yes. Yeah, I understand that it's probably a lot of work to code the data in a way, so that can be useful. All right. So in paper 4, you did a number of interventions, which I find very exciting. It must have been fun to do some hands-on work. Were there interventions that you consider before doing this study that you later on decided not to do?
I think this was work with a public catering organization. So they were the ones we discussed this with them. I mean, what should we try and what should we not try, and so on. And I'm trying to remember how we thought when we decided this together. But ultimately, the choice was the organization. That I think we had a number of options that we could explore, and they picked out 4 of them, so to say. So that was the reason behind that. And 4 was kind of good because it was kind of focused. Maybe afterwards I might have wished for 1 maybe more intervention, or the targeted serving waste, or maybe kitchen waste to be included. So you get kind of the full scope of interventions that target the different fractions equally. But I think 4 were enough to keep track of, actually.
Okay.
And we were also a bit unlucky with the pandemic at the time when we tried to roll out those interventions.
I see.
So
I see. I think the awareness, taste spoon, and waste tracker are sort of easy to understand for the children. But how about the forecasting data? Was that easy or difficult for the staff to perceive and understand? Or
yeah, I tried to make. I mean, what I did when we went, I phoned them every Monday, and I told them, okay, next Monday it will be this Tuesday, and I also sent them via an email. And then during Friday, they replied to me how the outcome. So we had a very active communications. So I think in the article we have used this forecasting, but I mean, to the kitchen staff, I was the forecasting guy, and so I made it very personal with them. So I don't think they. I didn't explain why it was a certain number. I just told them, this is the number, aim for this. And I think that worked fairly well to demystify this.
I see.
So to say.
And they didn't, they just accepted
yeah,
the number.
I mean, we had some discussions for sure. And then, I mean, then I amended the forecast to that. So, I mean, it was also a bit of discussion. I think especially for the first day where we kind of fine-tuned this, so to say. Yeah. But after 1 week, it went very smoothly, I would say.
All right. Oh,
but I mean, it's impossible for me to phone to every kitchen in Sweden to give them a forecast. I mean, but during the intervention period, this worked really fine, because then you also get information on other things. I mean, how is the corona situation and stuff like that? And I mean, are there a lot of staff shortages, for instance, or a lot of and so on. So, and that was also very interesting. But at that time, when we started, I think it was as normal as it could be.
All right. Okay. Interesting. And I move on to paper 5. And so there seemed to be a trend of decreasing amount of food waste. Can you explain those trends? What do you think caused the trends?
I think one big reason is the release of this quantification standard by the Swedish Food Agency. I think that is one reason. That has lowered the threshold and has put an end to debate on what to quantify and how this should be defined and so on. And I think this standard, I mean, it has the definition in place, and it has a spreadsheet that they can use. So it has lowered the start for kitchens to try to do something. I think that is one part, at least, that is quite big. And then I think there's a spillover effect that has been going on for quite a lot of time. That people are hearing that other municipalities are doing this, and they feel kind of obliged to do this too. And then you also have this thing that public catering managers, they tend to switch jobs also. And then if they have worked with food waste and food waste quantification, they tend to pick that question with them to the next municipality. That might not explain the large or the decrease, but there is a lot of things happening within the food waste community in the Swedish public catering sector, I would say. There's a lot of discussion and debate. But there's certainly a lot of things have happened since 2018 or 19 when this standard was released. And I think we can attribute some things to that standard, at least.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's a topic that a lot of schools work with different ways, with competitions or comparing with other schools, and or just trying to teach the children not to waste food. And so, yeah. Great. Well, thank you very much. It has been a great experience listening to the discussion today and reading your paper, and I leave the word to the next person.
Thank you, Katarina. And I hope to meet you soon also.
Yeah, me too.
Yes, thank you. And then we move on to Tom, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Nice
Hi.
nice to meet you, Christopher, and for a very well put together thesis, a very clear presentation, and some very thoughtful remarks from the discussion so far. Just as way of background and to say thank you also that Christopher provided some of the detail behind some of the data, especially around standard deviations and some of the very nerdy statistics, so that we could use it to help the United Nations to give guidance on how many restaurants, how many hotels, how many public catering institutions may be needed to get a particular level of precision for making national estimates. So I think there was a question earlier about how this work could be used practically, and it may well in many other ways, but it has already been used as part of that. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I'm going to hold back. I've got some comments on household food waste and edibility and kitchen diaries that were part of the discussion, but not part of the thesis. Maybe we can pick those up. There definitely is stuff that already exists that's better than kitchen diaries. Let me say no more than that at this point.
Great.
But the first question was around how the data, the secondary data that you were using, especially in paper 1 and paper 5, how kitchens themselves were collecting that. So in the UK, there are quite a lot of commercial systems for measuring and also helping kitchens to reduce their food waste. So companies like Winnow, Lean Path being two of the major proponents. Were there many of these public sector kitchens using those kinds of systems, or was it a simpler system of a bin and some scales and a piece of paper or a spreadsheet, something cheaper and lower tech, shall we say?
Yeah, the second. I mean, the most common way of that people document food waste is using a spreadsheet. I would say this is, I don't know, 80% of all the data comes in a spreadsheet format, I would say. Then you also have, this is maybe also printed out, and they write in the spreadsheet on a paper, so to say. But you have also some, but this is not very common, that you have this scales and you categorize automatically. I mean, there are some solutions out in the public catering sector, but it's not very, very common. And I think this is related to costs. I mean, the initial cost for buying such equipment, for instance, from Winnow is in the eyes of the public catering manager quite expensive, because they don't, it's hard to convince them to invest in such a technology where you have a cheaper option available. So that's the short question to that. But most of the secondary data is in spreadsheets, either the Swedish Food Agency standard that have a really good one, I would say, but there's also homemade templates that have caused some headaches to try to understand what are they trying to do here, as all spreadsheets tend to do at some point.
No, that answers my question. It was sort of a curiosity of how that data is being generated in the first place. And then I guess one of the questions that follows on from that is, as you say, data was coming to you in a number of different formats, and the coverage of that data differed, as you explain in the thesis. So some of these kitchens are measuring plate waste, some are measuring serving waste, some are measuring some of the earlier stages, but not all of those. And I wondered how you handled that missing data, especially when making comparisons. I was struck by the small amount of kitchen waste. So from those early stages that was coming from schools and other public catering sectors, and wanted to ask and to check that it wasn't an artifact of those organizations, those kitchens not supplying that data.
I would say it can be both here. I mean, I know that there are some kitchens that, I mean, they have kitchen waste, but this is not recorded. And this is very hard for us to, I mean, verify. I mean, we kind of rely on self-reported data here. So of course there's an element of missing or not quantified data. But what we know is that to try to meet this thing, we try to collect as much data as we could to try to combat that. And what we also knew was that we put in this criteria that we need to have serving weight and plate waste and guests, for instance, to calculate this waste per guest factor as also a way and a mechanism to ensure a certain level of data quality here. But I mean, of course, this is not perfect. And the question is then, how do you get people then to quantify them, for instance, kitchen waste that might be underreported? And this is, this is a tough question, I would say. But then again, also we have had a lot of, not maybe a lot, but some meals are also pre-made, so you don't have as much kitchen activity. So that might also be part of the explanation why it is actually not as high as, for instance, in restaurants and hotels. Maybe, yeah. So we have tried to kind of compensate for that, but of course, what you gain with doing maybe a deeply analysis of one kitchen, I mean, you cannot do that when you have thousands of kitchens. So there's always a balance here.
Yeah, and I think some of it came down to the handling of missing data. And it looked like in, I think it was paper 5, that you've gone to pains of scaling up the data in different ways. So scaling it up by those different processes, waste processes within the kitchen, and by subsector for some of the calculations, and then compared that where you took that total. And correct me if I'm wrong, that there were slight differences in the results from that.
Yeah. And I think that was really interesting to see how the different indicators respond. But I was a bit surprised by how similar there are. So I think what I've been doing by collecting a lot of raw data, I mean, that is really, I think that is really interesting. But this is also very costly to do this. So I mean, you maybe also need to find the balance here. Are there a cheaper option available? So for instance, the Swedish Food Agency, what they do is that they take the median of every organization that support them with data, and they use the median of every organization and scale that up. And I mean, that works reasonably well. So I would say that is a cost-efficient method. But before we didn't know that, but now we know that. So I think that is also great. Okay, they have chosen this path to collect the food waste data on a national level, and it actually looks quite similar to the other metrics that we investigated. So I think that is also important to verify what others have been doing.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I guess one observation from work that I've done for the UN in gathering together a huge range of studies measuring food waste, not just in the food service sector, but in households, in retail, is when there is I think you have it here, a wealth of secondary data to draw upon that other people are actually doing these measurements, then if that can be collated together, it provides a very cost-effective way of getting a reasonable estimate. And it comes into that realm of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, that
exactly
that there is always that opportunity to improve and to refine, and there's a role for, you know, people in universities, people like myself at RAP, to try and keep thinking, can we make it better in a cost efficient way? But then actually rolling out a method that may not be the most accurate way, because there are practicalities to consider as well. And one of the other questions, and you discussed this quite a lot in the limitations, is you're aware that you're getting data from some of these kitchens, not all of the kitchens, and that there may be a difference between the kitchens that supply the data and those that don't. And I was looking at the in the main part of the thesis, at the end there are some tables, table A1, table A2, where you've scaled up the data in different ways. So one of them is doing it just taking averages over all of the days, if I understand it correctly, that you've been provided with. And one way you take it where it's averaged over kitchens and establishments. So you do get the average for each of those and then take the average of those. And what struck me was that there was a difference between these. And effectively, one of those methods is weighting, the one where you're looking averaging over just the days, is essentially giving more weight to institutions that provide more data and measure more. And there seems to be less food waste there than the institutions that only provide a little bit of data, when you're averaging and essentially weighting in a different way. And I wondered if there was an analysis that could be done, maybe you've already done it, to look at if an establishment is measuring lots, it's wasting, say, this much, and as it measures less and less, it may be tending towards what could be used as an estimate for the block of kitchens that aren't estimating, and wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question that we discussed when I started here. I mean, what is the minimum days that you could actually quantify, and it could be a valuable information? And I think we still haven't really found that threshold yet. But thank you for reminding me about this this kind of question. I haven't thought about that in a while, so I think that is something worth to explore, actually. But I know that there are these, I mean, if you weigh it in different ways, I mean, it can look a bit different. And I think I remember when I started to work with this question, I got this question also a lot from kitchens. I mean, how many days do we need to quantify? I think that was to actually tell something, and then I had a very practical answer to them that is not related to your question, but I mean that is to start small for them to actually kind of get going in their kind of improvement work. So I mean to kind of shift the focus to that end. But this is definitely a question to explore more. I mean, how could this? Where is this threshold? So to say. But I don't know yet.
And I get asked this a lot of, you know, how much does a country need to measure? And if you have a representative sample, then often it's surprisingly few kitchens or surprisingly few days are required. But it's that big if, and the biases that might come from whatever method is using for gathering or collating data, and trying to ensure its representativeness. And I just wonder if this is something that could, it may not say how much those that aren't measuring are wasting, but that kind of analysis could hint at the scale of difference between those that measure a lot and those that don't measure so much.
No, I agree. This is something to explore.
That concludes the questions I had. So again, just to reiterate, thank you very much for that very good presentation and for the really interesting and informed discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Then is there any follow-up questions from the evaluation committee that you'd like to address, or any new things that you'd like to ask or discuss with Christopher? Then I maybe ask also the reserve if you have any question or anything you would like to get clearance for.
So you've been touching on a lot of topics in your thesis and in the discussions today, and you have been quantifying a lot of things. And as we have heard here, a lot of things are difficult to quantify. Some things are even difficult to define.
Yes.
You might have bias, as Tom said here, because you're asking some kitchens to be a part of, and they voluntarily do that,
yes,
but others don't. You typically have high variation. You don't know if the students come and don't come and what they actually do and what they actually like. You might be thinking about, I mean, you've been doing observational studies, but you could do an experiment, you could do interviews, you could study behavior. And everything is like time consuming and expensive, and it cannot be measured very well.
Yeah.
But if you could like just ignore all the problems.
Okay.
And you would do one study to decide, or you do one study that really would put this research further on. You could do anything in any way. What would be the most important question to follow this up within the reach of your thesis?
Yeah, first of all, I think that is a really important question that the answer should not be rushed. So maybe I will come back to that later. I need to think about this, but my fast answer is there's a lot of I'm really interested in combining this experimental method that we spoke about with Slava to do a proper experimental setup, but also explore this with maybe mixed methods and to combine this with interviews in the field of food waste interventions. And I mean, to look at what interventions actually work and what don't work. That I think is really, really important. There are also other fractions of waste that we don't capture at all, like liquid waste and so on, and also maybe to develop methodologies to quantify such waste flows. But also, as Tom touched upon here, there are also other areas to quantify household food waste that is not based on kitchen diaries, to kind of maybe work on tools that can help such work. That is the short, rushed answer, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other? You have one more chance from the evaluation committee if you'd like to follow up with some question.
I had one, not sure, yes, if it's a question or a comment. It follows up on that experimental part. And Christopher, you were saying earlier that you can't force a kitchen to adopt an intervention. And I wonder if, in terms of the design, having your control versus your intervention group, that the intervention group could be defined not by what they adopt, but by what they get exposed to. So the intervention is actually just trying to convince them to do something. Maybe they even get to select from a group of different from that toolkit that you mentioned earlier, and that's what the intervention is. Whether they decide to do that, you'd want to track and follow it. But that could be a way around this blocker of you can't truly randomize who does what because they have a veto on what they choose.
I think that is a clever approach that I really haven't thought about. So thank you.
No worries.
That might actually work. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Then there will be opportunities now from the audience to ask questions. And for you joining online, if you like to ask a question, you can use the device to raise your hand. And I think I have the authority to allow you to speak if I push the right button. Otherwise, you can, of course, write in the question answer, and I will try to read the question. But I think it's much more better if you ask the question directly to Christopher. So I will put my computer here so I can see. Yes. So let's start here in the room. Any question? Yes. Osona, you will have the microphone.
Thank you. Yes, I was thinking about the over reduction. Over preparation of food. That is one way of reducing the food waste. If we can reduce the over preparation, that can be done through estimating the guests, but the institutions have to purchase the food most of the time, especially in the case of household. It is over purchasing. One of the factors, the main factors that causing the food waste. How about in the case of the institutions? Have you observed that one, if there is any over purchasing?
What we've done here is we have forecasted the first kind of abstraction layer in this. And that is how many guests will actually turn up, I think. And when you are in an institution and you ask people how many people are supposed to eat here, you can get vastly different answers, which is a bit surprisingly, I think. So I think the first thing that you need to solve is, okay, how many people will come here? I think that is the first question. Then, of course, the next question is, okay, how much food should we purchase and cook to those people? And then, of course, you need to have a recipe that is in line and scales to that amount of people. And that, I think, is the next kind of level that needs to be done. So what we have done here is we have stopped at the first layer, but of course there are other things that needs to be in place to have a more perfect system. And I think way of forecasting attendance, the way that we have done it now is very manual. But for this to be useful, I think this should be embedded in the purchasing systems. So when kitchen staff, when they plan, they get indication of how many will turn up automatically, and they need to manually correct this if it's a holiday or break and so on.
The data can be used for reducing over purchasing also.
Yes.
Yes.
Potentially.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I was thinking also about the storage waste. In this case, you haven't discussed much, but it is indicated here. What do you mean by storage waste here? Is it in the kitchen, do you mean, or?
This is in the kitchen.
In the kitchen.
Yes.
So do you separately quantify that part also?
Yes.
Yeah, and yes, in relation to this one, what I was thinking is that in the case of storage waste, sometimes, I mean, you have collected the data from 2010 up to 2020, if I am correct. This is your data duration, I mean.
Yeah, but I mean, kitchen did not quantify waste every day.
No, the data that you are.
Yeah, it's 10 years.
So yes, based on that one, if we take the storage waste over this period of time, there may be sometimes data outliers. I mean, some big amount of wastage from an institution. It can be due to food contamination or some specific issues.
Yeah.
Have you sorted out that kind of problem, or in the data processing, or anything?
No, I mean, the main focus has been on serving waste and plate waste. And I think, of course, there are storage waste, but as we had the other discussion here earlier, I mean, kitchens tend not, either they don't quantify kitchen waste, where storage waste is a part of, but for sure there are storage waste, but what we have observed is very, very little in comparison to the other waste fractions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if we have any questions from the webinar. No? Any more questions here? Yes. We start there and then we take here.
Thank you for a very nice defense, Christopher. My question regarded the forecasting. Was the forecasting only done for schools, or was it for several other serving places as well? And if it was the forecasting in schools harder than, for example, for elderly care or preschools?
I mean, the forecasting was done for preschools, primary schools, and upper secondary schools. So there was no forecasting done on elderly care. So I mean, preschools and schools was the kind of scope for. I think the hardest establishment to forecast is a secondary school, by far.
Yes, it sounded like there was a lot of parameters and like soft absences.
Yes.
People not calling in sick, but just not showing up to the food hall.
Yeah.
Do you think there's something to gain to forecast other serving institutes as well? Or restaurant canteens?
Yeah, I think there are definitely elements of, I mean, that they can be very, very similar, some institutions. So I think that can be, I think there can be some crossover effects that I think a secondary school establishment can be pretty similar to actually a large lunch restaurants, for instance. I think there are similarities for sure. And the good thing with these restaurants is that they often have very detailed level of information of how many guests they actually served, and I mean they have economical numbers, so you have a different scope for there, and a lot of more opportunities than you have in the public catering sector, where you don't keep track of this information in the same way. So I think there's more opportunity there, actually.
Thank you. Very interesting to read your work on modeling and forecasting.
Thank you, Oscar. And Johan, you have a question.
Thank you. Yeah, I was sort of intrigued when you talked about this metabolic waste. And I was sort of thinking about, so the core issue is reducing the amount of resources that we use, therefore we want to reduce food waste. But in some way, the resources are used when we buy the food or consume the food, or like when it enters the kitchen, they are sort of already consumed and they might be wasted or not. So I was thinking, sort of when you quantify and design interventions, you sort of look, okay, this much food is wasted per portion, and then you look after an intervention, you see it might go down, and that's good. But I was just curious, do you think there is a risk of sort of pushing food waste from food waste to metabolic waste with an intervention? And if that is a risk, do you think it might be better to also quantify sort of just portion size and see if the portion size go down, that's a good thing?
Yeah, I think there's of course always these problems that you have interventions in place that are supposed to do good things, but they kind of backfire and causes other problems. And of course, this can be the case. But I think, and I think and I think this is very often used as an argument that you should not force people to eat up, for instance. And of course, it is reason in that argument as well. But I think the level of plate waste we see here, I think there's still, I mean, we are not there yet, that we are having that kind of problem, I would say. That's my feeling. And I mean, if you are to compute the portion sizes, I mean, this is doable, but it requires a lot of quantification effort that is tricky, I would say, to the precision in that kind of quantification work is very, very hard to get precise, so maybe you get backfiring results there. But yeah, no, I don't really know. Yeah.
I guess this problem might be more in places where you have a fixed portion size.
Yes.
That the guests can't decide themselves. Then it's sort of
for sure.
Food waste there might just mean that they overconsume.
Yeah. Here it's very variable. In where I've been looking. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. I will just have a check on the computer. No, I cannot spot any questions from the webinar participants. Any more questions here? No. Well, in that case, we are coming very close to closing this session. But before that, I'd like to inform that the evaluation committee will have a closed meeting afterwards. That means that those of us physically present here will have to move to another building. And for Katarina and Tom, you are supposed to have got a new connection or a new link, which Agnes Soto provided to you, which means that we will close this meeting, but you can rejoin in the other link. And we will probably need at least 15 minutes to get to the place and to arrange with the connection. So you can take a break, but then please come back. Okay. With that, I would like to thank you all for your contribution for this public defense. Christopher, the opponent, the evaluation committee, and also the questions you have raised here. And I think we should give a big hand for everybody who has contributed and made this to a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. So, this session is closed.